money in that particular neighborhood, there's less competition, right? There are fewer businesses, right? A great example might be grocery stores, right? You might not have any large grocery stores that can provide food items at relatively low cost, okay, in these communities, because the private sector is not investing there. So instead, what you might have might be one or two small, little tiny corner grocery stores and no competition among those grocery stores. So think about your economics 101. When you don't have a lot of competition, what happens to prices? Prices go up, right? If there's no competition among, for example, grocery stores in an area where there's a high degree or high concentration of poverty, prices for goods and services go up. And so there is significant research that shows that residents in low-income communities or very high degrees of poverty neighborhoods, they tend to spend more on things like food, car insurance, financial services. There might not be a bank, right? There might not be any type of financial services that we might assume are just commonplace in middle-class neighborhoods. So the fewer the stores, the fewer employers who are located in that particular community, the less competition, which raises prices for a variety of goods for the low-income households that live within that high concentration of poverty. The third effect is that it limits, when we have a high concentration of poverty, it limits job networks and employment possibilities. Okay, it limits job networks and employment possibilities, okay? What is probably the best way or the easiest way that you know of to get a job? Yeah, run on.
Apply online.
I think you can definitely apply online, but what is a surer bet? Yeah.
Through a family or friend.
Exactly, right? Like the best way, or sort of the most common way, or maybe the most effective way, I should say, for you to get a job is for you to have connections, right? You have connections. Maybe there's a friend or a family member who works in a particular company and knows of an opening that you might be suitable for. One of my colleagues who used to be one of my students and is now getting her PhD in the social work, the School of Social Work here at Rutgers, I noticed that we have some openings at the Blaustein School for part-time lecturers in public health. And so as soon as I saw that announcement come out, I emailed her and I said, hey, you should apply for this. And she wrote back, thank you, and got her resume together and all that. So it's people looking out for each other and telling each other about job opportunities. If you have a situation where you have a high degree of poverty or a high concentration of poverty and employers are not around, what you actually have is a distinct cutoff, right, between an information about jobs, right? The people who are living in that community stop having connections to employers, right? They're effectively cut off from the types of networks that we know, the social networks that we know are essential to helping people get jobs, okay? They become cut off, okay? And then another negative thing happens as a result of that. If people are cut off from social networks that help them get jobs, then we see a lot of people who are out of work in that particular community, and then that becomes more of the social norm. It becomes more of a norm or a commonality that people are unlikely to work or to have a steady job, right? And ultimately, what we really want to have is an ethic of work and a notion of work as commonplace. But if people are cut off from these employment networks, lack of employment becomes a norm in these areas with a high concentration of poverty. Employers as well might attach a stigma to workers who are coming from these communities and refuse to hire them. So that is another feature related to number 3, that employers might establish or have a stigma that they attach to people coming from these communities and might be less likely to employ them. The 4th negative consequence of living in an area with a high concentration of poverty is that it inhibits educational opportunity. Children who live in communities with a high degree of poverty often attend neighborhood schools where most of the students are very poor. Okay? Children in low communities mostly attend public schools where most of the other children are very, very poor. And as a result, those students are at greater risk for failure academically, as measured by a whole host of factors. When we think about failure in terms of education, we might be talking about standardized test scores, okay? Standardized test scores, they might be more likely to get lower test scores in that community. They might be less likely to be promoted from grade to grade. They might be more likely to drop out, especially at the high school level. So poor neighborhoods are often associated with poor educational opportunities because the schools in those communities tend to be poorer. Okay? Schools in where we have a high degree of poverty also struggle in a variety of ways. These schools in these areas might be unable to attract the best talent to teach, right? If we have a school that's very, very poor and is struggling, it might be hard for us to attract very well-qualified teachers to teach there. Those schools are also have to cope with other things. We know that people who are poor tend to move a lot in American society, okay? If you haven't had the opportunity to read the Pulitzer Prize winning book, Evicted, I really, really encourage you to read it. It's an excellent book that looks at the plight of low-income and poor Americans as they move from apartment to apartment to apartment due to a variety of social issues around them. But because these families tend to move around a lot, that might disrupt their schooling, right? If they ultimately end up in another school. So schools suffer from a problem of attracting the best teacher talent. They have to deal with a high degree of what's known as student mobility. That means the students are moving around a lot and they're moving in and out of schools, right? And they have to deal with a lot of other social issues that schools in upper income neighborhoods simply don't have to deal with, right? Related to issues of poverty, issues of medical health of their student body, issues of food security, that is, the students are coming to school hungry, that middle class and upper class schools simply don't have to deal with as much. So for a variety of reasons, both students, from the student perspective, as well as the schools themselves, there's an inhibition of educational opportunity. We also know that in general, that areas where we have a high concentration of poverty opportunities to get a decent job in a particular community, if there's no opportunity to educationally grow, and to think about a future where you're educating yourself, you're getting a good job. If those opportunities don't exist, sometimes people will turn to criminal activity in order to support themselves. Okay? So we see this often with areas with a high concentration of poverty. Higher levels of crime are likely to be there, including violent crime as well as drug-related crime. Areas where we have a high concentration of poverty, this is likely to contribute to poor physical and mental health. So, if you're living in a community where there is a high degree of poverty, oftentimes what we know is that the environment in which individuals are living is not likely to be the best, okay? There could be environmental hazards such as poor air quality, okay? Poor drinking water. Flint, Michigan should come to mind. Housing is likely to suffer from a variety of deficiencies, perhaps lead paint, asbestos. These environmental factors, as well as poor housing conditions, lead to a variety of negative physical and mental health outcomes for the people living within these communities. So researchers have noticed that oftentimes with people living in a high degree of poverty or a high concentration of poverty, they're likely to have a higher incidence of depression, asthma, diabetes, and health ailments, other types of health ailments that don't afflict the middle class and upper middle class to the same degree. Even worse, if they do have some type of physical or mental problem that needs to be addressed, they often find that the health care that they receive is of much poorer quality than people living in middle income